Good evening, everyone. My name is Joy MacPhail, and on behalf of the Douglas Coldwell Layton Foundation for Social Democracy, it is my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. It's lovely to see so many old friends and new friends as well. I'd like to begin our evening by calling up the elders from the Sayote Nation to welcome us here today, and it is our pleasure to have Doug and Kathy LaFortune.
Wow, big crowd here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Doug LaFortune. I'm Coast Salish. I used to be an artist for 50 years of my life, and all of a sudden I became an old guy. Now I'm an elder in training, and I'm from a place called the Sayote Nation. We're out towards the BC ferries, and we've been there for a long, long time. Like this place here. As a matter of fact, this place here that you are right now is a very sacred place. This was a village for our people for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. And as soon as it was settled, our people were moved out across the water by the Johnson Street Bridge. And then they were asked to move to Esquimalt. So this area was a real resourceful area. It was like a marsh, and there was, we got ducks, we got, clams, all kinds of stuff like that, seaweed, everything. It was very important to our people. So this area is sacred, and I'm glad it's being recognized for that, because our people, were here for a long, long time. And we like to acknowledge where we're from, what our people are doing here. And when our people would come to visit us in our villages, they'd usually come in canoes and stuff like that, and they would be usually singing, happy songs. They wouldn't be, if they were warring, then there wouldn't be songs. They would be, they'd be in a bad mood looking for people, So anyhow, we'd have ladies on the beach ready to welcome them, and they'd have one representative stand up in their canoe that were, depending on how many canoes there was, they'd be asking to be accepted on shore, and they'd come with their hands, both hands open. The one person would be, and he'd say, that means I have no weapons, I come in peace. And when they did that, they were allowed to come in, and we'd share our food with them, we'd share our lodging, and back in those days, we all lived in a, what is called big houses now, but before we lived in large houses like that, and we had 4 or 5 families in, and it was the way we all lived back in, before this was settled. So we'd just say, you can come in. Excuse me. You're welcome to come in. We just ask that you leave all your troubles outside when you come in. We want you to come and have, share with us, share food and sing and dance. And our people, the Esquimalt, the Quaman, Songhees, our people, the Wasanish people from the peninsula area, we'd all be part of this, and we'd like to welcome everyone here from different areas to our territory. And welcome. We would like to welcome you here. Thank you. Now my girlfriend's going to say something.
Good evening, everyone. I am Kathleen Horn. I'm Doug LaFortune. We have been married for 52 years, and we got married here in Victoria, which is now a conservative Tory of Music, the church that we got married in. So we really love Victoria area, and we've lived here for like 40 years of our lives together. But I would really like to acknowledge everyone who came to be here to this event this evening. I know a lot of you traveled great distances, and appreciate the good works that will be moving ahead tonight, and sharing experiences and good words and lifting each other up and supporting each other in a good way. So by saying that, I raise my hands to our Creator, thanking Him for bringing everyone safely here to attend this wonderful event, to lift each other up, to support each other and share knowledge, share words, share good conversation. As you move through the evening, enjoy the food that has been prepared with love and care to nourish your mind, your body, and your spirits. And as you travel through the evening to share good conversation, I pray that Creator will put a hand of protection upon each and every one of you as you have arrived here, and when you depart, that He protects you on your way home to your territories, your families, and communities. Hajka, kleko, kleko. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the Foundation's Executive Director, Josh Bijak, and Vice President Brad Levine for inviting me to join with you tonight. It was just over 50 years ago that Tommy Douglas launched the Foundation as a charity dedicated to the education and promotion of social democracy and politics. And here in BC, to mark the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the first elected social democratic government in this province, the Barrett government, come on. The Foundation launched the Dave Barrett Lecture Series and Scholarship at the University of Victoria. So tonight's event is part of the Foundation's ongoing commitment to convene informed conversations to promote and educate British Columbians. And tonight's topic is Trends in Social Democracy, Insights from Canada and Beyond. And we have two amazing speakers who will share their insights with us. One is from Canada and the other is from beyond, I guess. First up will be our friend from our sister organization in Germany, the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, also Stiftung, which means foundation. And then we'll have David Coletto, who has some fresh polling, very interesting, just completed in British Columbia and was commissioned by the Foundation. So first up is our good friend of the Foundation, Knut Dethlefsen, who will give us some insights of social democracy from around the world. Knut has served as the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation representative to the US and Canada since 2018. And prior to serving in Washington, D.C., he led the FES offices in Warsaw, Jerusalem, and Shanghai. In between, he also served as the department head of the Asia and Pacific Department of the FES in Berlin. Knut worked for Senator Dianne Feinstein, the recently passed senator from California. He was a legislative fellow with her. He advised the senator on foreign affairs issues, and he obtained his master's in history, political science, and economics from the Technical University of Berlin during that period of time, as well as a master's degree in foreign service from the Georgetown University. He's a proud member of the Social Democratic Party, the SPD, as well as the German trade union Verdi. We are happy to have him here with us. He's already had fascinating conversations with those of us who were eligible to sit next to him, and you're going to be sharing in that now as well. Please welcome Knut Dethlefsen.
Well, thank you, Joy, for this very kind introduction. Guten Abend, good evening, friends. The Socialist International had its convention in 1978 in Vancouver, and I'm now here, in a way, to reconnect German, European Social Democrats with British Columbia for the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, which is Germany's foundation for social democracy. It is the first time that we are actually in British Columbia, and I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to thank the Douglas Coldwell Layton Foundation for the kind invitation and for having me here. And I would like, of course, thank you all for coming here and your interest in this conversation that we're going well, it's, I guess, a lecture now, or like a talk, and 2 talks, and then a conversation. And this is very exciting for me. And I think it's also a good sign for our cooperation, because the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation in Canada, and I would like to acknowledge, so that you know, my colleague Jordan Leichnitz, who sits here right in front and who runs our operation in Canada on a daily basis. Our task is really to bring new Democrats and social democrats closer together across the Atlantic, and to make sure that we have also this international spirit, but also that we learn from each other and support each other. And I hope that this event will contribute somewhat to that and connect British Columbian social democrats in their endeavor to win majorities to German social democrats. And we also obviously have the endeavor to win majorities, because we govern right now in Germany, and the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, is a social democrat. So we have that in common. I know your election is up first, but ours is already looming, because next year seems always far away. But who is in politics knows 1 year from now, that's not so far away. And with the state of the world, it is, of course, very difficult to win elections for social democrats. Now, I would like to start, because I think you probably, many of you have read, seen, talked with or about Willy Brandt, with a quote from Willy Brandt, which one of his last speeches that he didn't give because he was very ill in 1992, when the Socialist International, and it was probably the last really meaningful meeting they were having in Berlin in 1992, he said something very important, which is kind of the theme of my topic. I translated it into English for you. Therefore, remember your strengths and the fact that every age wants its own answers, and that you have to be at its height if good is to be done. So that means that you have to adapt to time as a social democrat, and also know really what's going on and feel the right trends, and also that you cannot just be ideological about what's going on. And I think social democrats experience, at least in Europe, but maybe also here, a time of crisis and opportunity at the same time. And it depends very much how we play that, how successful we will be. Now, let me speak briefly about crisis. Well, I live in Washington, D.C., so I know a whole lot about crisis. I lived through the Trump presidency, and now I get up every morning and I hope that we will not see that again. But also in Europe, we have a series of crises and that have left their marks. I just name a few, the ones of the last 15 years. The Eurozone financial crisis, a massive influx of refugees from Afghanistan, but also other places. Brexit, the pandemic, which hit different European countries in a different way, and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all its consequences for the European continent. And the war is much closer to us because it's not far away and its effects are directly felt. And it leaves an impact of deep social unrest, and for many of our voters, a feeling of left behind and not being heard. And this feeling of insecurity and the worry about the future is often exploited by the extreme right, by the far right. And in Germany, you have seen since 2014 a rise of a party which calls itself the Alternative for Germany, the Alternative für Deutschland. It is not an alternative. It's a very bad and dangerous party. And it has evolved from being a mainly anti-European party to become an outright racist, right-wing party. It was originally led by, I call it, conservative C elites. And now it's led by politicians that speak the language of Nazi politicians, and their views are clearly right-wing extreme. They are anti-establishment, they are openly authoritarian, and they are pro-Russian. They admire Putin as a strong leader. And they're clearly a Nazi party, and they are observed by our Federal Bureau of Investigation. And their language and the way they do politics has changed German politics fundamentally. Alexander Gauland, who was the leader of the party in 2017, and this is when this party entered the German National Parliament with almost 14%, screamed into the night in September 2017, "Wir werden sie jagen." Well, he screamed it. I don't want to speak like him. Which means we will hunt them down. And now this violent language has become to some extent reality, with multiple SPD and I have to say also Green politicians being targeted by violent attacks. And this was just recently in the last 3 weeks. I don't know if you followed that here. But to make it, the bigger concern is, of course, that this development is a real danger to democracy, and we, as Social Democrats, have to find better ways to address voters' concerns. And what is very important to me is that migration is often seen as the cause of the rise of the far right. But I think it is more important that this has fueled deeper anxieties that were already there, and they are about economic opportunity and the ability of governments to deliver. And that is where we often don't perform the way we should. And this is why I believe this moment is a moment of opportunity, because there is a focus on our values, beautiful values, social justice, solidarity, and democracy itself. And we see that if you do things right, things can work. Now, Joe Biden is maybe not a social democrat, but he is as close as you can get to social democratic policy as you can get in the US. And with his industrial policy, which also focused on good union jobs, he has done with something that is very attractive to social democrats and which social democrats can study. And it works, of course, only because the US has the economic power to change markets in a way and change the direction of economics. But it's still something that at least we in Europe look very carefully at. And for social democrats who need manufacturing and good labor jobs that require labor, this is very attractive. But the SPD itself won the elections in 2021, which was unexpected, not to me, but to many. And it had to do that we, in our message, we stayed on message, but we also offered tangible benefits for working people. That was the minimum wage, a rise in the minimum wage, protecting pensions, but also a campaign that focused on respect for each and every one in society, and trying to make clear that we don't want to divide people. But if you look at another great example, which I like personally very much, is Pedro Sanchez. So we do have charismatic leaders in Europe. That is Pedro Sanchez, who turned in 2023 the conversation around about making it an election about the right making deals with the far right and blocking the far right from entering into government. So there is an opportunity standing for liberty, for freedom and democracy, and have an offensive strategy against the far right. And these, not alone, if we look into the future, Keir Starmer and UK Labour are very likely to revive social democratic fortunes in the UK. And that's really good news, I think, after so many bad news that came from Great Britain. He's, of course, more centrist, but he has a viable path which is, has the potential for durable majorities and hopefully will also deliver for working people. But there are other examples. Australia, our brothers and sisters there, and President Lula in Brazil, who we visited last year in solidarity of his victory. In sum, there are many opportunities if we innovate and if we propose bold solutions to these to the challenges that are there. But there is, of course, a problem that we have to deal with. We often have good ideas, but we don't manage to close the deal with the voters. And that is to some extent because we have lost partially or even completely our traditional voter base, that is the working people. And that is, of course, a problem and a challenge. We are not close with the working people, and that has to be improved. And that doesn't mean that you have to, I mean, it has also to do with the sociological changes of our parties, but it is still important, it is important that we move closer to the working people. That doesn't mean that we have to be like them. And working people, in my view, in particular for Germany, that would be true, is not only blue-collar labor, but also white-collar labor. Mainly people that really work for their money and don't live off investments, mainly. Because they profit least from globalization and have the cost with the increased living cost, the job competition with cheaper countries, and cannot evade taxes like corporations, and will potentially suffer from the climate policy increasing prices. So Scholz's Respect theme was, in a way, a reaction to that. He tried to combine the emancipatory path of social democracy with the social path. Yes, for individual freedoms, but also we need to make sure that people's material conditions are good. Identity questions cannot subsume material ones. And of course, to win, you need always a portion of good luck, but more importantly, you need charismatic or at least convincing leaders who can show connection and real understanding of what people are going through. And I guess in BC, you have a leader like that, and you're very fortunate in that. Now, if we look forward, what is, in my opinion, important is that our economy is under enormous stress from a number of reasons. You have the technological change. In most European societies, you have aging populations, and you have external stress factors, which are huge. The conflict in Russia and other wars, energy prices, the influx of refugees. Germany has taken in 2.5 million refugees in the last 10 years, which is enormous stress for a society of 80 million. And the next 10 years are key to where we will go. The conservatives are going further and further right, and they are also going back to the 80s, which means they want to deregulate everything. And they are flirting with the far right. Social Democrats are the only ones that clearly reject authoritarianism and embrace internationalism. But at the same time, and that is very important to me, people worry about our ability to be responsible with finances and to manage the economy well. And budgets, at least in Germany and in most European countries, are completely overstressed. So we need to ask ourselves, do we really need another social program? Or don't we do better with the programs that we have and we make those programs work better for the working people? And how do we regulate the financial markets so that they play a productive or not a destructive role? And how do we make all companies pay taxes? Very difficult, actually. Sounds easy. We are working very hard on that. We believe in a society based on solidarity where everyone does its best and we help each other. And this means everybody should have equal access to shape his and her own life. And we need to have the responsibility to fight barriers in our society through education and inequalities that deprive some people of the freedom to pursue their dreams. If we succeed, we have the opportunity to oversee a huge technological and economic transformation of our society. And that is going to make this equality a reality. Internationally, it is very important, I think, that we fight for open but regulated markets. And that we have international trade and investment agreements and good rules and standards, because otherwise others, like China, will set those standards. And we need inclusive governments that upholds the rule of international law and diffuses conflict. I believe that multilateralism is something that we need to fight for and that we need to stress very much. At the same time, I believe it is very important not to overregulate society. So let also freedom play out and not kill the market economy, but find a path between liberalism and, well, an overregulated society. We need basically what I think what social democrats need to work for, a new deal for societies where citizens feel heard and empowered and where we can share prosperity. And like at the end, one thing that is, I think, very important for us and ourselves is that we remain optimists. There is hope and fear. We need to be the carriers of hope and also convey this to people and not make people afraid of the future, but rather show a path forward with optimism and realism at the same time, but also believe in ourselves and in our comrades around us and not work so much against each other. Because that is sometimes also the problem with social democrats. Maybe not in Canada, but in Germany. So anyhow, I want to leave you with that outlook, and I look forward to the discussion and the data about Canada. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Knut. That was just excellent, very thought-provoking. And continuing on provoking us thoughtfully, our next speaker is David Coletto. David is the founder, chair, and CEO of Abacus Data, a full-service market research and strategy firm based in Ottawa and Toronto. And we've all seen David in the media reported upon and reporting to us. With 20 years of experience, David founded Abacus 14 years ago, and since then he has become one of Canada's most respected pollsters, and as I've said, is sought after to provide analysis on politics, the labor market, and consumer behavior. He earned a PhD in political science from the University of Calgary in 2010 and is an adjunct professor at Carleton University. He is the host and producer of In Focus with David Coletto. That's a podcast that explores the intersection of public opinion, politics, public policy, and consumer behavior. Earlier this year, the Hill Times newspaper, which we all read, named David one of Canada's top 100 most influential people in Canadian politics. Please welcome David Coletto.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Joy. Pleasure to be here in Victoria. I am not 20 years old. I did not start this company when I was 10, but I always tell people that because they always wonder how old I am. It's the first question they ask. But I have this amazing job in that I get to ask thousands of Canadians hundreds of questions every week. And I get to explore both the good sides and the bad sides of how people are feeling about their lives, about their country, about their province. And over that time, you come to learn a lot about one thing in particular, and that is I don't live in the world of reality. I live in the world of perception. And what people think, how people think the world works, how they think outcomes happen, or why their food prices have gone up, or why the price of gas has increased, or why it seems that things aren't working as well as they are, matters far more than why they are, or why those things actually have, because those perceptions then influence their behaviors. And so today I want to take you through a little bit of how British Columbians are feeling about the situation today and tie it back into that great presentation from Knut about social democracy and how I see social democracy playing to respond to the needs and the aspirations, but also the worries of British Columbians. And so when you think about the world, and Knut described it in very clear detail, the crises that have hit Europe have hit North America and have hit British Columbia as well. And you think of that through the perspective of all of us in this room. In 2022, the Collins Dictionary comes out every year with the word of the year. And in 2022, that word was permacrisis. And they defined permacrisis as an extended period of instability and insecurity. Now in 2023, the word of the year was AI, but I think you could have also described 2023 as permacrisis, and it does feel that even today we're living through that continued extended experience of insecurity and instability. And so as a pollster, I ask myself, what does that do to us? How does that make us feel? How do we respond? And what's become very clear to me is that over the course of the last year and a half, there's been an emerging mindset that I think has defined how most Canadians, most British Columbians, I think most Germans and Europeans are feeling about their world, and that is one of scarcity. And if you're like me and you were born, let's say, after 1980, this is a world that is quite new to you for the most part, right? That for Canadians, we're for the most part quite privileged and lucky, a fairly wealthy country, but the idea that a growing number of people, and I'm going to show you data, feel that the things they need in their life are hard to get, food, fuel, healthcare, housing, means that we're left wondering, if I have these things, am I going to lose it? And if I don't have them, how am I going to get them? And the result is what I believe, and there's research that backs this up, an emerging sense of we're living in a zero-sum game. That if I gain, someone's losing. And if someone's gaining, I'm losing. And that's the result of this scarcity mindset. So today I'm going to share some data that's, I think, going to help inform our conversation, and I hope give you a sense of where British Columbia and the province is going. Now, when Josh and the team at the Douglas Coldwell Foundation asked me to do some research, I said, yes, I'm willing to do it. I'm ready to explore what British Columbians are thinking. I had all these ideas about questions to explore the connection between what they know about social democracy and how they feel, and we've got some data that I'll share with you in our conversation. But I couldn't help but realize we're in the midst of an election year, and as a pollster with a political science degree, I said, let's find out what's happening in the province and give you an update. So I'm here to share some very brand new data. This survey was completed last week. We interviewed 1,000 eligible voters in British Columbia, and I'm going to take you through fairly quickly this result. You're the first folks to have seen this, and it hasn't been released yet. But the first thing I want to start with is just how are people feeling in this province? And pollsters usually ask one question: do you think the province is headed in the right direction, or is it off on the wrong track? And 31% of British Columbians feel the province is headed in the right direction. Now, there's two ways to think about that. One is that's fairly low. That's not a lot of optimism. Now, when you ask Canadians how do they feel about the country as a whole, only about 24% of Canadians feel good about the country. So British Columbians are feeling a little more bullish about their province than Canadians are about the country. When you ask Canadians, how do you feel about the world, only about 15% of Canadians think the world's headed in the right direction. So we are, British Columbians are a little more optimistic than the rest of the country. Now, what's on their mind? When we ask them to rank their top 3 issues, we give them a long list. Just for those at the back and can't see this, cost of living, housing, and healthcare are the top. By the way, you go to pretty much every province in this country, and those are the top 3 issues. But what's unique to British Columbia is we see some other issues. Poverty and homelessness, number 4. Drug addiction, taxes, the economy, and jobs and climate change round up what I would call the second-tier issues in terms of their salience and those that people care about. And so what does that mean? Well, if we go a little bit deeper, 2/3 of British Columbians believe their income is falling behind the cost of living. 2/3 believe the housing crisis will get worse before it gets any better. 72% believe that food prices will continue to rise and increase. Now, a smaller percentage, but still, given that British Columbians are feeling fairly optimistic about the economy, generally speaking, 42% believe that employment opportunities will worsen. And then, to tie in what Knut said, 72% believe that geopolitical risks will continue to create volatility. So you sum that all up, and I sound like a Debbie Downer standing in front of you here. Sorry, I missed all of those. 42%, thanks, Josh. 72% believe geopolitical risks will get worse. That all sounds like a pretty challenging environment, and it is. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and this is probably as bad as I've seen public opinion. Even in the worst of the pandemic, the first few months of that pandemic, more Canadians thought their country was headed in the right direction than they do today. So then the question is, how is that impacting people's political choices? And I've got some mixed news. I know what audience I'm standing in front of. The first thing is, how do people feel about their political leaders? So we asked British Columbians, how do you feel about the 4 main party leaders on a positive to negative scale? Premier Eby has actually quite good numbers. 40% have a positive impression of the Premier, 27% have a negative. As pollster talk, that's a net favorable impression, which, by the way, is very hard to find in any jurisdiction right now in the world or in Canada. So he leads with that and is the most popular leader in the province. I'm going to give you a little bit of a tease where we're going. John Rustad, the leader of the Conservatives, hasn't really seen his positives or negatives change all that much. We did a survey back in November, but that doesn't mean support for his party hasn't, and more on that in a minute. Now, when we ask British Columbians, which party do you think is best able to handle the issues they care most about? As a political scientist, I studied all the theories of voting behavior. I think there's one that, for me, sums it up the best. And again, Knut, I think we didn't even share notes, but I think we're aligned. Most voters that aren't deeply partisan or connected, I think, vote for the party they think is best able to handle the issue they care most about at the time they're voting. And so when we ask them, Which party do you think is better to handle the cost of living, which is the top issue, housing, healthcare, poverty and homelessness, and drug addiction? On 4 of the 5, the New Democrats are ahead, right? On healthcare, on housing, and on poverty and homelessness by double digits. If the election were about any of those things, and I think they will be about most of those things, the NDP are in a strong position. Only on drug addiction right now do we see the BC Conservatives ahead. And on the most important issue, on the cost of living, the BC Conservatives are only slightly ahead. And just to give you context for that, and when we ask the same question about the federal political landscape, the federal Liberals are 25 points behind the federal Conservatives on that question. So the fact that the BC NDP is competitive is a big win and a big signal about how people are feeling the government is responding to their needs. Now, when we ask respondents their sense of desire for change, do they want change? 47% of British Columbians say they definitely want to see a change in government, okay? Only 20% say they definitely want to see the NDP and David Eby reelected. Now, that's good news. And you're asking, how could that be? Well, we're in a multi-party system. You don't need 50% of the vote to win. And in fact, when you compare this data to data that I've asked in other provincial elections or at the federal level, these are the exact same numbers that Doug Ford, and you don't boo, that Doug Ford had in the lead up to the 2022 provincial election in Ontario, in which he won a resounding majority government. Which is to say, there are close to 30% of British Columbians who say, I'm not quite sure if I want change or if I don't, but that's what a campaign's going to convince me of. And so I actually think David Eby and the New Democrats are in a strong place. So what does all this mean? Everybody asks, what's the horse race number? A number of polls have come out that showed it's tightened, and we continue to see a tightening of the race. If British Columbians voted today according to our survey, the NDP would get 40%, the BC Conservatives 34%, the BC United at 13%, and the Greens at 10%. Back in November when we did a survey in British Columbia, we had an 18-point NDP lead. Today it's down to 6 points. Now, I still think this means a New Democrat majority government, but it's certainly tightened up. But all of the other things I shared with you earlier, strong impressions of the leader, the desire for change not as high as we've seen in other change elections, signals that there's still lots more to come. Now, what's happening? In Metrovan, the New Democrats are ahead by 6. On the island here, you're up by 15, and you're statistically tied in the interior and northern parts of the province, right? Trends that we've seen. But the last data point I want to share before we turn things over to the conversation is, I think, an important part of this discussion that I'm seeing at the federal level, but when I saw this data, I kind of took a step back, and that's how does this break out by age? And if I had looked at data and said that I thought the New Democrats here in BC would be far more popular among British Columbians over 60 than they are among British Columbians under 30, I would have said that goes against everything I've ever learned about politics, about British Columbia, about young people. But that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing it consistently across the country. Younger people right now, those most affected by the housing crisis, by the cost of living crisis, by a sense of insecurity, seemingly are looking for something else than the incumbent governments that lead them now. And so the question for Social Democrats is, what do you say to young people? Right? What is the social democratic solutions to the anxieties that they feel, not just about the world and about climate change, but about their day-to-day lives? Because right now, populism, particularly a version of it, a right-wing populism, is speaking to them, is offering them security, right? A sense of change, of hope even, that the outcomes that they're experiencing don't have to be this way. Even if, and I'm trying to be as objective as I can, the solutions are very thin and very little detail is often offered. But it's that sense of change that people want that I think they're looking for right now. So to wrap up, British Columbians are feeling anxious. I often I've come up with a term called inflation-itis, right? And it's a disease that inflicts incumbent governments of all stripes, of all political orientations. That sense of my wages aren't keeping up to this rising cost of living, and I feel my standard of living is on the decline, is something that's very hard for a government to overcome. And so my warning is that British Columbia is not immune to that disease, and that what's happening both federally and in other parts of the world can happen here if that cure, that antidote, isn't clear and isn't effective in people's minds. So I will stop there, and thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, oi, is what I want to say about that, David. But it was very enlightening. So we're going to just talk amongst ourselves, the three of us. I'm going to start by asking some questions of the men, and we'll try to leave enough time at the end of the evening that we can all socialize and discuss what we've learned here today amongst ourselves as well. We are being hosted till 9 o'clock, so we've got lots of time to do this. David, I think I want to start with you by asking a question about some of the polling that we haven't seen yet that you did. I understand you did poll on some issues concerning social democracy, and can you expand upon those findings?
Yeah, I think what we learned in the research, we wanted to understand, do people, when they hear the word social democracy, by the way, they don't know what that means, right? Can you all hear me? Yeah. And so there's no point asking about that specific perspective or ideology or approach to governing. But when you ask the principles of social democracy, right, there you can find what attracts and perhaps repels people. And what we learned in the research was two things in particular found widespread support across the province, right? The basic one is that government's job is to make sure that everybody has equal access to high quality public services, and no one lives in poverty, right? 69% of British Columbians agree with that idea, okay? Now that's almost universal. You're not gonna get 100% agreeing, but that's as close to you can find a consensus these days. The second one relates to the value of work, and in particular, the labor movement, right? People often assume that the general public thinks that unions have no value, that unionized workers are somehow, they get something special that they don't. In fact, what we've done, and we've done other work with the foundation in the past that shows actually, if you're not unionized, you're more likely in your working to want to be in a union. And so there's a broad understanding and an appreciation for the value of organized labor, of valuing work, of respecting the work that people do, that I think is the starting point to building a broader connection. Where there's less understanding or appreciation, where I think the right often can come in, are on issues of identity, are on issues around some of those cultural issues that sometimes people don't understand. And so if you focus on where people's heads are at, I think you're much more likely to find a connection.
Good, thank you. Knut, you talked very powerfully about the AfD in Germany, and you spoke about how the rise of the far right in Germany takes place specifically through that party. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that arose over time? What period of time in Germany, and what methods did the AfD use to mainstream those far-right issues?
Yes, of course. Thank you. I think this is, obviously, it is a broader trend in Europe that you have the rise of the far right in European countries. And in a way, Germany was very late in having a far right successful party entering national politics in the parliament, and also the AfD, or the Alternative for Germany, the far-right party, is less successful electoral than, for instance, in Italy or in France, where you have much stronger far-right parties. I mean, the far-right party could even win the presidency in France, and that is, of course, not possible in Germany. Of course, because of German history. And that is somewhat hindering the rise of the far right. Now, what the far right does is very similar to what you see with Donald Trump in a way, only that they don't have a charismatic leader, is that they break taboos, that they consciously say things and then they said, well, we never said it like that, we never meant it like that are very offensive. And by that, they change the whole discourse. They push the whole discourse to the right and have succeeded in a way that, in particular, conservative politicians feel inclined then to embrace some of that language that they are using in a different way and making that, and it has to do in a way, it focuses a lot, what is it to be German? And how to deal with German history. And then, of course, it has to do a lot with how to deal with migrants and migration. And then they do something that they talk about social issues or problems. And in reality, if you look at their programs and so on, they have no inclination to solve any of it. But they talk about in a way to say the way they say, for instance, I give you a concrete example and it's easier. They say, well, a German pensioner should not have to collect bottles because you get like a refund for bottles to sustain himself. Of course, there are not many pensioners that actually do that. But it's something you can see that people do that. You don't know who they are, but that is a reality that you see in the street. And they talk about it in a way as if this is a reality and that is the fault of foreigners coming into Germany. So that's, and then very important, they're super aggressive, very aggressive in their language. And then they are very strong on social media. They use bots, and they are ruthless. And they are, I mean, complete ruthless and shameless too. And they are very successful with that because, of course, the algorithms of social media are good for them because the more radical you are, the more it gets shared and they build their community through that. So they are the most successful political movement in Germany by far on social media, and as in any other country, society, social media plays a far more important role in politics. If you like it or not, it's a reality. And I mean, we at least can say, I mean, we woke up so late to that so that we have missed the train, you know, it's gone. And I don't know how we will catch up with that. I actually don't have an answer to that question that we will have to figure out in the next year and a half.
Do they operate successfully at local, state, and federal level?
Well, the regional differences are huge. You know, they are particularly doing well in the former East Germany, where like democratic structures are less firm, and they are particularly bad electorally in the German Western North. They're surprisingly successful in the Southwest, which is economically doing much better than the North. But I guess there are like deeper underlying traditions in that. I mean, after all, Germany has a Nazi past, and that cultural and political tradition was covered up, but it has not gone away completely, and they definitely tap into that. And they are, I mean, they will do well in the European election. That's where they started.
Which is the next election you're facing.
That's the next election in June. And what my biggest fear is that they will do well in one of the regional elections, like a state like British Columbia in East Germany. It's called Thüringen. And they could be the strongest party, and then it will be very difficult to form a government. But in a way, they usually, I think that these violent attacks that their supporters are right now carrying out actually will harm them electorally, because that is I think, pushing it too far.
David, I have a question for you, but Knut, I would ask you to, after David gives us his views and data on this, if you could comment on his knowledge in relation to what you're experiencing in Germany as well. And that is, David, what demographic is the most optimistic and what demographic is the most pessimistic? And I also want to see whether you can comment at all, which we haven't discussed yet, whether there's any gender differences in either of those issues.
Yeah, it's great. So historically, at least, let's say historically, the last 15 years, you typically found in the research we would do in Canada that younger people were the most optimistic, right? Either because of a lack of experience or just because, you know, the world is in front of them. But we've seen over time, and this is one of the most interesting parts of why we're seeing this divergence in terms of their at least stated impressions and intentions around voting and their views of the political system, is that they've actually become more pessimistic about the future. And so I think age and life stage has become a really important predictor of that. When you intersect it with gender, younger men actually are the least optimistic cohort in the country or in the province right now. And as a result, they're the most susceptible to radicalization. They're the most likely to say they would support, for example, the People's Party of Canada. And, you know, digging deep into what's causing that, it's a whole other lecture for this. But I think you see this evidence of this right across the democratic world. And so this idea that the future just isn't for me, there isn't a place for me in it, becomes a really big part of, I think, the opportunity for far-right or populist elements to connect with them and say, we've got a place for you, right? That they lack a community.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing which ties into this, what I'm saying, is that what the AfD does, they always want to show that democracy doesn't function. And they even like their behavior in the parliament is like that they constantly, at very inopportune moments, call for votes when the MPs are not there. And then, because it's, for instance, late at night, they will suddenly call for a vote. And there are procedures you can do that. And then, you know, and they do this on many levels. And this is something what many young people feel. They feel very I actually don't know if they feel optimistic or pessimistic, but I know they feel pretty disconnected from the political system and feel like the democracy is somehow not that cool and that also political parties are not that great, and they much rather do other. They're not unpolitical. I think that's a wrong characterization of young folks nowadays, but they want to put the energy not really into political parties. But any political party has really problems to recruit young people for politics. And now for Social Democrats, they're particularly bad news that, like, Social Democrats in Germany don't convince young people. And so the young people vote Green, or they vote for our so-called liberals they are not liberal, they are right-wing, conservative, market liberals. And they actually, young male voters vote also for the AfD. But there are big regional differences. And also the feeling about connectedness and how you see the future depends a lot where you live. And the regional differences in Germany are very big. And that's why you also have very big voting shifts. And generally, Germans don't feel very optimistic. Now, that is not unusual. So that's like, would not be like, for me, a sense to worry. Because that's that Germans feel now positive about the future is a rather rare moment. I have to say, I want to say one thing, like when we were young, which was like in 1989 felt very optimistic, which had to do with 1989 and the change of 1989, which was like suddenly, wow, he said, like, you know, everything can change. That's why it makes a big difference. And so the generation of 68 also felt very optimistic, and because of the big change that they were able to push through society in the 70s, basically. So that were very optimistic moments, and one has to create a moment like that, or it has to come historically. And right now it is, of course, a very different time, and that's why it's like so important that responsible people are in government who offer a positive vision for the future to lead us through these next 10 years. Otherwise, you will have the 1920s repeated.
On that question of male disenfranchisement and disaffection, do you think that the rise of the physical attacks by the AFD on other politicians, particularly related to these elections coming up, are those attacks being carried out by a certain demographic?
Yeah, they are very young. And they are, but this is now a very specific German phenomenon. You had in the very early 90s in the east of Germany very violent Nazi groups which were carrying out all kinds of attacks against, I mean, at the time that was horrible because they lit up refugee homes, and they killed many people on the street, and those were also very young people, and these are the children of those people. So there is in East Germany this very sad tradition of this right-wing extremism, which in particular areas, one being Saxony in the southeast of Germany with the capital of Dresden, there is an organization, it's called the Free Saxonians, and which is super right-wing and which wants like ethnically clean Saxony. So anybody who's different out. And that difference is, of course, ethnically or like politically defined.
David, we've been talking about people's concerns about the future and how that's an issue of concern. Is there any link to that concern about the future and voter intention?
Strongly, yeah. I mean, you know, you look at that question I ask about direction of the province or direction of the country. Right? That's a simple way of measuring optimism or pessimism, and it's strongly correlated with how you might vote. What's interesting in the data, though, is you know, whether you're going to vote for the New Democrats or the BC Conservatives or BC United, what most British Columbians agree on is that the cost of living is a big problem and that people feel like they're falling behind. The difference is that those who are ready to, for example, re-elect an incumbent, which is, regardless of what political persuasion it is, feel optimistic that things are getting better and that they can get better, right? And I think what we've come to is a moment in time, a unique moment in time, at least in the last 2 decades, where the tools that governments have to make people feel that they can get over this are very limited, right? And that then creates doubt and declines trust in institutions, in belief that the state can actually help me, which is in direct conflict with the belief that social democracy is the solution. So you're creating this spiral, right? That then creates an opportunity for the free marketers, for those who want an unregulated system, who want to unleash the potential of the free market or whatever language they might use, because it works. And in preparation for this, because I'm not at my core a social democrat, always trying to learn and understand it, I read a number of things, and one of them was Ed Broadbent's final book. And in it, he describes his kind of coming into political life in the late, and when he was first elected in the late 60s and then into the 70s. And he described the time in a way that felt so much like today, right? High levels of inflation, the lingering effects of the Vietnam War and what that was doing to young people and the activism that they felt. And he described the backlash or the counter backlash, which was the rise of Reagan and Thatcher and, in Canada, Mulroney. And so I do, like, history feels like it's repeating itself, and that we are in this cyclical kind of period where, because of the failures in people's minds about certain policy instruments, they then say, well, government can't be the solution because, look, government got me here.
It's interesting you say that the opportunities for us to campaign on a positive change are becoming more limited. And Knut, you described the Respect campaign that was successful by the SPD in 2021. You touched on that a little bit, but is there any lesson we can take here as we enter a full-blown campaign season?
Possibly. I would say that our Respect campaign did not really develop its full potential. It was potentially very good, and the main slogan of the campaign, which was successful, we won the majority. I mean, not the majority, we became the strongest party, was very good. So respect. Instead of saying social justice for everyone, because then everyone says, yeah, what does that mean? That was, I mean, I'm not joking, that was one of our campaign slogans in a lost election. And already when it came up, I thought, God, what a terrible slogan. So respect is something concrete, and where people, and it's also, it wanted to express, and I think it was not fully understood, that we don't want people to change their life. It's great that you are a construction worker and you don't need to get a different education, because that is something that, Social Democrats, and Democrats even more in the US, have been bad in like saying, yeah, well, you have to get a better education to compete in this competitive society. Obviously, many people are very proud of their jobs, and that's what Social Democrats should embrace and have always embraced. And the Respect campaign tried to make that very strong, this respect. But it also tried to combine, of course, like how do you work, but also how do you live? So who you are, what identity you have. So it's like the liberalism in society at one point, but also respect for the work that you do, for the contribution you bring to society, and that you are worth as much as someone who's very rich and well, has a lot of course, possibilities through that. And that, was not, like, let's say the media never really liked this campaign very much and embraced it. But Scholz was what was good about Scholz, our candidate, was that he was always on message. He never left that message. People always said, you have to talk about something else, the numbers are down, and he was just stubbornly for 8 months saying that, and in the last 8 weeks, it turned around. But what was important, and I guess that's what you're doing here, I assume, is that it was not only a slogan, respect, because then they say, okay, what does it mean? You're going to do something for me here? So what he did is he said, I'm going to raise the minimum wage by €2. Now that doesn't seem a lot, but it meant a huge difference for like 6 or 7 million people. And those, they saw that and they voted for him. Not all of these 6 million, unfortunately, but a huge chunk of them. And so that's how he won the election. And the promise to keep this pension safe was also very important, because as in this contest for deregulation, there was a heavy attack on the pensions. And that's going to be in the next election even more heavy because the conservatives in Germany really have made, after Merkel, a strong turn to the right and coming really back with these old recipes that already failed in Germany. So,
Well, certainly as an old organizer, I was always taught that campaigns matter. And David, how firm, we're going into a campaign, how firm are voter intentions now? And is there a potential for change?
Well, yeah, I'm someone who doesn't think that like about 40 to 50% of the electorate's not really paying any attention to this and won't until the campaign starts, which tells us that they aren't firm. I don't think, for example, the BC Conservative number is firm when, on the one hand, they say they're going to vote BC Conservative, and then I say, who's John Rustad? And they say, I have no idea, right? So I think that's a signal that right now it's easy to tell a pollster, I'm going to vote for change until that choice comes. So I think there's still potential. On the other hand, I also think there's still upside for the BC Conservatives in an environment where people are feeling the way that they are. So I still think a campaign will absolutely matter. And, you know, I'm not going to sort of judge the political actors in terms of their abilities, but, you know, David Eby is no slouch on the campaign trail. So I think he is going to perform well up against a rookie who, you know, going to be hard pressed to demonstrate he's got a full team that's ready to take the government on, and Kevin Falcon just can't catch a break, so I don't think he will anytime soon.
Well, we haven't mentioned the federal voter intentions yet, but when you were talking about John Rustad and the BC Conservatives, we do have Pierre Poilievre, who is gaining support as the federal Conservative. Do you see any evidence of switchover, his appeal to perhaps New Democrats, federal New Democrats that may influence the BC Conservatives? Is there a mishmash around there?
Yeah, it's a really, there's a fascinating kind of flow of voters happening. So let me just start at the federal level, and then I'll bring it into how it connects to the provincial party system. But, you know, everybody says, and I was asked this, I did a podcast for the Toronto Star where like the premise of the podcast is like, why is the NDP doomed? And my answer was, I don't think they are, and here's why. But one of the most important things to note is that despite the federal Liberal drop in support, the NDP has basically held steady. The NDP is exactly where it's been for the last 5 years, anywhere between 17% and 19%. Now the sub-story of that is they've gained a significant number of disaffected Liberals, but have lost close to 10% of its past support has now said, I'm going to vote Conservative, okay? And when you think about who those folks are and you look at where they are, they live in the interior of British Columbia, Northern Ontario, Southwestern Ontario. They are the exact people that Knut was talking about, right? Think private sector, unionized workers in manufacturing resources who, for whatever reason, haven't felt that the federal NDP anyways has respected them, have spoken to them, right? Now, when we bring that to British Columbia politics, what's interesting is of those that would vote for the federal Conservatives, 10%, so 1 in 10 say they would also vote for the provincial NDP. So it's not a huge crossover, but that's enough that might make the difference between a very, very close election and a not so close election. And it shows that, you know, I'm from Eastern Canada, and when we come out here and we say, oh, how could somebody go from voting NDP to the Conservatives? Back in Ontario, that doesn't make much sense to people because we think politics is linear. You go from left to right with the Liberals in the middle. We know out here and in the prairies, for example, that's not the case, right? And I think we need to move past this linear, this left-right idea of politics and start to understand that it is far more nuanced, and your profession and your background and region has a much more important part of that. So in order to keep the winning NDP, BC NDP coalition together, you do have to think about how do you keep, you know, those seats you have in the interior? How do you speak to folks up north? Because those are the seats that I think Conservatives right now, both here and, by the way, in Ontario. I'll just give you one example. Windsor, Ontario, okay? If you think of a union town, that's it. Doug Ford won the first seat that I think the PCs have ever won in a really long time in Windsor. And if the polls are correct, Pierre Poilievre will win a seat in Windsor, Ontario as well. Why? Because of that realignment that's happening among working class, particularly unionized, private sector unionized workers.
Very informative. We're coming
Woohoo!
to...
David's full of joy, right?
Well, I was very careful in selecting that word informative as opposed to uplifting. Yeah. No, it's... You're wonderful at your
Knowing's half the
polling.
battle.
I totally agree. I absolutely agree. And it's very useful what you've done. So we're coming to the end. I just want to ask one last question. I can't let Knut go without telling us about his Washington experience. You've been there 6 years, 6 glorious years, I imagine. And just what have you learned about the differences about what resonates amongst progressives who live in the U.S. versus who live in the EU, other than they're idiots sometimes?
Well, I don't want to say that progressives are idiots, but I mean, what I really learned, I mean, you just said it, I mean, campaigns do matter a lot. And I just want to pick the examples I gave you. Scholz in 2021, the election was in September. In July, he was still down. No one thought, like, people would not even invite me because they thought we were not relevant anymore. Because they thought, well, the Greens are going to win the election, which was, I mean, to me, inconceivable. And it obviously didn't happen, and it's also not going to happen. And Pedro Sanchez also, I mean, he was also, they said he's going to lose that election, and he won it clearly. So, and that was had a lot to do with campaigns, and also, and not only pretending, but to really meaning it and be serious about it and to offer a way forward. And I think Joe Biden, and this is like, you know, in 2020, did exactly that in a much bigger scale, of course, in a far more difficult political environment. And I was sure from March, pretty much when he became the candidate, that he would win that election. And that's how it, well, obviously that I believed it had nothing to do that it happened, but there were, I was also very lonely often when I was saying, like, I'm 100% sure Joe Biden is going to win this election. And that was because he just was undeterred by whatever the other candidate and incumbent said. And he was like, I always call it the Northern German dike. He was like, you know, we have, because of the storms that come over the North Sea, we have these walls by the sea, and they are very long, so that the waves go up and then they go down again. And that's how Joe Biden was. And that his experience and also his, like, imperfection was an advantage in that political environment. And so that's why it depends, of course, on the historical moment. I'm not sure if he has that same ability now in the 2024 election, but that experience to me also, like, I must say that the COVID pandemic in the US was a very scary experience. And I would have never thought that the most powerful and richest country, and you live in the capital of that country, and you feel like you live in a really existential crisis. Not only theoretically, but practically, that you feel threatened for your own livelihood because a government is not able to handle a pandemic. And that is, of course, was a very scary experience, but it highlights that's why I say that it is very important for a government to deliver and to make sure that people are fine. And that was exactly the promise that basically Joe Biden gave. You know, if you elect me, I'm going to solve this, and you're going to be fine again. And people who wanted that voted for him and came out for him. But this is also something, of course, for us to take away, that nothing you can take for granted, and you have to be ready for these extreme difficult moments and be able to handle them. And so this is what I took away from my 6 years in Washington, D.C. And I have to admit that I have to leave in July, and I have to go back to Europe, which is, of course, in principle great. But at the same time, I will miss this, well, the conversations here and the conversations in Washington very much, and also the opportunities. And something that I cherish about North America is, of course, the dynamics and the openness, and what I like very much. And with that, I would like to thank you also for the opportunity to speak here in this beautiful environment, and with your great moderation, and in this beautiful town, which I love very much. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank both of you. It's been absolutely fascinating and wonderful to, first of all, get to know both of you, and then to have such a great conversation. Thank you to you both.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you so much, Joy. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, David, for being here. Knut, wonderful. Everyone, one more round of applause for Joy MacPhail, Knut, and David. It really is amazing to have you here, Joy. You're a legend, and it's just so wonderful for you to be here.
Okay, I have to tell one story. I wasn't
Go
going to
for it.
tell this. An old friend came up and talked to me tonight, and it was wonderful to see her. And David was sitting next to me. I don't think he heard this, but the friend said, "Oh, is that your son?" And I was grateful, because she didn't say, "Is that your grandson?"
Thanks, Joy. That's pretty funny. Thank you. What an informative evening. You know, I think this has lived up to exactly what we wanted. And so let's just get it, everybody here, who found this to be a fun event to come to, informative, something you would all come to again? Wonderful. Because that's exactly what our founders, both Tommy Douglas and Jack Layton, wanted us to do, to come together in rooms like this, to share information, become insightful, to learn something, and then go out into the world and do good things with that information that we just learned. So thank you all for being here tonight. On behalf of the foundation, we're very grateful that you could all join us. So we're here because of people like yourselves who have gotten involved. So I want to tell you about, really quickly, a few things that we've done recently. So how can you get involved with the organization? This is a charity, and so there is a democracy within this charity, and you can get involved by becoming a member. You have an opportunity tonight, if you aren't already a member, to join the Douglas Coldwell Layton Foundation. If you like this kind of informative session, you can help support our research. In fact, one of the pieces that David had alluded to was our report on mental health and wellness in the workplace, and national data that we collected of working people and their mental health. So you can support that work. We also just released a report on long-term care, also something that you can support. And we're going to be continually doing this kind of research, but also providing these kinds of events. And we do that through a series of events right across the country. And I would be missed if I didn't also bring up the fact that we just launched in February at the legislature a brand new scholarship in memory of our dear friend Ian Reid. For those of you in the room who know Ian, this is a brand new scholarship not held at any one school, but instead with the foundation in support of the LGBTQ+ community. And so if you want to get involved and you want to assist us in the good work that we're doing, you have your way to give us that support. So thank you. I also want to thank our sponsors. It wouldn't be possible for us to host this kind of an event in such a lovely venue if it weren't for the support of LiUNA Local 1611, our founding sponsor here in Victoria, the IBEW Local 230. I know there's a whole bunch of folks from the IBEW Local 230. Phil's here. Thank you, Phil, for your support. How about a round of applause for the IBEW and LiUNA? And then, and in fact, just a little bit earlier, we found out that HEU also came on board in support of this event, and I believe there's some representatives of HEU. So let's get some, thank you. Thank you. That, it really means a lot. So thank you so much for being here with us. I hope you've enjoyed it. Our partner organization, the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, or the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation. If you haven't heard of FES or FES yet, I encourage you to look them up. If you like what Knut had to say, and you're interested in hearing more from them, they're an incredible global think tank that works in social democracy. The insights that they provide are tremendous. I encourage you to get involved with them as well, because once again, we're creating this network where we're able to share information and insights and learn from each other, both our failures and our successes. And so it's a real gift. And so thank you, Jordan, for making this partnership possible. We're grateful. And then lastly, thanks to all of you. I want to give you all some time to appreciate each other. Please do come and grab David and Knut and Jordan, and ask them the questions that you're keen to ask them. We're going to do our best to share this video and this information with everybody here tonight. So look out for that email. If it goes to your promotional box in your email, you got to find it. But I definitely encourage you to stay in touch with the foundation. We'll be back here in Victoria sooner than you think. I think at the other end of this election, we'll be right here to celebrate with all of you. So, all right. Have a great night, folks.